looking forward to meet you in person, but yeah, some technical difficulties has precluded from that, and we will enjoy online talking more about migration advantages to the north and how they might change recently. Thank you very much for coming today. Instead of continuing your important work or doing anything else, taking time to sit, listen, and ideally discuss as well the interesting topic, which we will cover right now. I know quite a few of them, but not all of them, and I will give you a brief overview what you can expect from me or what's my background. Also, being born here in České Budějovice and actually falling in love with shorebirds and birds in early age, then I moved to Prague to do all my studies nearly there, with having a luck to have partially PhD studies in England at University of Bath. And then after finishing my PhD in 2018, actually, I moved to Hungary, and from Hungary we are coordinating international project investigating sex roles in shorebirds, but many various aspects as well. And then I was lucky to have mobility grant to Sheffield University in UK. And right now the loop has ended. Actually, I knew it for a long time that I would like to return at some point, but yeah, COVID maybe accelerated it a little bit. And right now I'm happy back in my home region, and I'm based at the Department of Zoology as well as Center for Polar Ecology. And later on in the end, I will give you more details about what we are going here in our emerging new group. Well, I love Arctic sites and Arctic locations, as well as some other sites. And of course, in the Arctic, many interesting things can happen, not only stumbling and finding mammoth tusk or having a nice time when traveling with Vjezdechod, but lots of other interesting things can happen. And of course, many changes are ongoing in the Arctic for not only birds, but all the animals. And quite recently, we established a new study site in Peru. Again, it's high Andean antiplano. That's not quite, let's say, Arctic or polar conditions. Those like smoky chains here are not smokes from the villages, but actually small tornadoes forming every afternoon and then sweeping the Salina with frontal dust sand salt storm. It's definitely difficult condition to work in, but rewarding in terms of really nice and unstudied shorebirds there. Well, and apart from cutting-edge science, I do like outreach activities, conservation activities, discussing with public, with people. This is something what we are doing right now. And we quite effectively combine the field work on our own sites together with comparative analysis and utilizing well already published data. Well, I have used so far quite a lot shorebirds as suitable model taxon, and we could stay ages here talking why they are so great, but although we will use them definitely many times during today, it will be not only about shorebirds. But just briefly introduce you our project in Hungary. We actually have the Elvonal Shorebird Science Project, and within this project we have collaboration with more than 40 teams across the world. And according to unified methodology, we are collecting data about sex roles, but in general breeding ecology of shorebirds from various backgrounds and environments. Well, but getting back to the topic for today, we will talk about migration. Not only about birds, but you are for sure aware that many other animals migrate as well, involving insects or mammals. Here we will concentrate more on terrestrial animals. That's not for now. We will forget a little bit about whales or salmons, or let's say other marine or freshwater migrating animals to some extent, because it works differently there. And of course, my expertise lie more with birds and terrestrial animals. That we will stay firmly on the ground and discuss mostly terrestrial animals and their migration to the north. and we will focus on long distance migration. That's not, of course, many of the aspects and discussed issues will be relevant to short distance migration or nomadic species too. But of course, those changes are profound the most for long distance migrants, and we will talk mostly about them today. Well, having some extreme examples, there is no need to step out of our uni here, and here is an article from Tereza Hromádková, and she with colleagues studied Arctic terns. This is the species who experience the longest daylight during their lifetime because they are breeding in Arctic and wintering around Antarctica. And they experience the night only when crossing the equator. And as you can see, the migratory routes are really extensive. They can change according to the season. That's not in the spring. They follow different, in the autumn going to Antarctica, they follow different routes than in the spring, usually making use of current winds blowing into their back and helping them to migrate, as well as utilizing suitable sites with enough food. Of course, some extreme migrants are definitely, some record months are among shorebirds too. I'm not sure whether all of you are aware of the fact, for example, that this little creature of size of a bigger pigeon, bar-tailed godwit, can migrate actually non-stop from Alaska to New Zealand during the autumn migration. During the spring, they follow the Asian coast, but in the autumn, they do direct flight, non-stop flight from Alaska, and during 10 to 12 days, the individual is burning half of its own body weight, and without any stop, without any sleep, any rest, it's traveled directly to New Zealand. It's not an extreme adaptation to migration strategies, and of course, then those birds who arrive safely to New Zealand, they have really high survival. There is nearly no mortality, because there is the firm barrier who is a little bit less in a worse condition, will not make it to the New Zealand. So again, just examples of some migration or migratory behavior of birds here. Unfortunately, what we know so far, mostly from some passerine studies, is the fact that we are losing migrating animals, losing migrating birds, and we know that they perform worse than non-migratory species inhabiting the same habitat, for example, which is the case here on the left from Netherlands, where the researchers studied resident versus short distance and long distance migrants in two habitats, in forest and in marshland. And in forest, actually there is ongoing mismatch in between productivity of the forest and then emerging of the caterpillars with the arrival of the long distance migrants who are like unable to predict the advanced season and advanced spring. They arrive a little bit later to the Netherlands, and then their chicks do not match well, or hatching the chicks do not match well with the amount of caterpillars for them, and on average they have like declining trends, or much more declining trends than species in the marshlands, where the abundance of food is less restricted to the given period. Here, for example, is just an example from North America, where radar data scanning how many animals, how many birds migrates can help a lot. And we know that during the last 10 years, or until 2017, we have lost there 14% of the whole biomass of species. That's not within 10 years, quite a big proportion of species, and the loss was obvious even before. It's really highlighting that something is going wrong with migrating animals. To contribute from sites of shorebirds, we unfortunately know the same, and it's obvious that the majority of shorebirds is declining. And actually, it's connecting to migratory behavior as well, because we know that migratory shorebirds do perform worse than non-migratory shorebirds in general. It's saying the same thing, different graph a little bit, showing that the percentage of decreasing species of shorebirds is really more profound in the north and in the Arctic regions, which of course consists of mostly migrating species traveling to the north. Well, and so far we have thought that the main issues for migratory animals, here in this case mostly birds, really lie on the stopover sites or on the wintering grounds, because those are really the crucial places where they need to gather and refuel well before ongoing during the migration, for example. And unfortunately, we know that the intertidal mudflats, in case of shorebirds or any other important stopover areas, can be lost quite quickly. For example, in Yellow Sea in China, there are huge reclamation projects using this land for some construction or even agriculture or cities. And of course, if those birds cannot refuel well, they have higher adult mortality and they are unable to even reach their breeding sites. That's not so far. We have thought that the issues are lying mostly along the flyways on the stopover sites and wintering grounds. If somebody of you would like to read more about this topic in Czech, actually, I can recommend one Vesmír article, which I wrote a couple of years ago, using the iconic species of spoonbill sandpiper, species where only 200 or 300 individuals are left in the wild, and who has been suffering quite a lot from those issues. Well, that's not just illustrating a little bit. Of course, the migrating animals are dependent on many places, many habitats along whole flyway during various stages. And of course, this makes them more susceptible to any change. And they signal really quickly that something is getting wrong with the given flyway, for example. And so far we have lived with the idea that the hunting pressure or habitat loss and disturbance during migration on wintering grounds is the major driver. Well, and right now I would like to find out whether I'm just talking to the blackboard or to the real people. Do not hesitate and reveal your face a little bit. And I would like to ask you, what do you think, why so many animals can migrate to the north? What do you perceive as a possible advantage to travel north and reproduce, being a mammal, being a bird? And actually, ideally, say those of you who have not read the 3 article, which we will discuss quite soon, but any of you can reveal your face and tell me why you would, as a bird or animal, travel to the north and breed there. What advantage can wait for you there?
Just a wild guess, maybe avoiding competition or predators.
Definitely very good 2 wild guesses. We will mostly cover the predatory perspective. It has been thought that north is quite free of predators, not really in terms of abundance, but it was predicted quite a long time ago that in tropics the higher variability of predators is difficult for breeding birds or animals there to cope with, and therefore they have higher predation rates in the tropics, and vice versa. Traveling to the north could help them to escape from predation pressure to some extent and having good breeding productivity. You have mentioned the competition thing. We will touch it really briefly today, but this is definitely something what plays a role as well. That far in the north, given the seasonality, there is nearly nobody during winter, and yeah, the less competition during the summer could be another advantage while traveling to the north. Great. What else would you expect far in the north during your reproduction?
There's someone else speaking, or can I?
Well, we will keep Kačka later on, because of course Kačka now it's quite well, but yeah, let's see.
It should be food.
All right, that's for sure. And how does it work in the Arctic with the food, Olda?
Because long photoperiod during summer means relatively much sun for basic production of plants.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely. We know that for sure in the Arctic is a high peak in abundance of food for migrating animals, and the seasonality of the environment and the really high productivity, a high amount of food in the summer. It's one of the main advantages why so many animals migrate to utilize this abundance of food. Olda mentioned one more important thing. That's in the Arctic during the summer you have no night. That's not the amount of food there is available around the clock, and some of the animals really do not sleep in the Arctic when they are there. That's that you can use the same amount of food more effectively because it's available nearly every time, of course, if not having really bad weather. And another advantage is that the environment is a little bit less structured than, for example, tropical rainforest. That's not, again, the same amount of food is more easily achievable for like foraging animal. Those are, let's say, three main advantages from the food perspective, and we are nearly there. We have left one more important advantage while traveling to the north.
Maybe another wild guess.
All right, go ahead.
Maybe an evolutionary one, like it secures only the fittest ones will survive till there, so that whoever gets to mate with the fittest individuals.
All right, and how you think that this, like, it's like advantage for whom and from which perspective? Let's think about it for a while. Of course, let's see your wild imagination going on, because I'm not sure whether I have got it really well how you mean it at the moment.
No, I guess that's a good question. Yeah, it would maybe serve the way I meant it as a filter. Yeah, but whether it's good for anyone, that's a good question.
Yeah, well, of course, if you are adapted, let's say, yeah, well, just continuing your talks, if you are, for example, a good flyer, you can cross huge distances quickly, then of course it's advantageous for you because you can go far and utilize those conditions. But one main advantage is quite similar to the predation, but it's not about predation, and I'm sure that Kačka knows it, and if we have nobody else, definitely we can discuss it together.
No, I actually don't know now. I thought another reasoning for the food, like that the food is really accumulated in the short time, so there is like a huge amount of food because it can't be distributed over the year. But I didn't think anything about the predation.
All right, well, it's not a predation, but yeah, everybody of us has some of those small animals with us, and there are less of them far in the north. It's not, again, it's predicted that the parasitation rate declines when we go farther to the north, and it's known that some animals really try to escape from let's say higher parasitation in the tropics or subtropics to reproduce well in the north, or just to get rid of parasites there. I think that this is also the reason for the influx and migration of Vanessa Cardui, the painted lady butterfly, who has quite a lot of parasites in Morocco, for example, or in South Europe. But when escaping to the north, it can get rid of the parasites. All right. Well, thank you very much for the interaction, for the nice chat. It's great, and I will return back to sharing the screen. And you see again my presentation, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, that's that we have covered all. more or less. That's not just summing it up. When traveling far to the north, we could expect lower predation rate there. We could expect lower pressure from pathogens and parasites there. And we hope therefore abundant food, really high peak in the short Arctic summer during the late June or first half of July, with plentiful food for everybody. And if we go back, it's obvious even in the temperate regions that right now in winter less amount of food is available here, but then during the summer months it's much better for migrating species, and some of those do not migrate far to the Arctic but are happily breeding here with us. But of course those are the presumed advantages which could have worked for a longer time from the evolutionary perspective. But we know, unfortunately, that our planet is changing quite rapidly, given to climate change impacts or increasing human pressure at various sites, and of course, especially in the Arctic. And those conditions could, let's say, change the profitability of migration behavior. We have now already an example, again, using shorebirds and studying in more detail one of those possible advantages, or actually the breeding performance. And we have shown that in the Arctic, actually, or in general, that using data about nest predation of shorebirds across the globe, we have found the expected humpback shape pattern, showing that the nest predation is higher in the tropics and going down to the both poles. But this was obvious only for historic data before year 2000. And for more recent data, the gradient or the trend was still the same in the southern hemisphere, but was completely changed in the north. That's not in the temperate region, in the Arctic regions, where we have witnessed the excessively quick increase in nest predation rates. Of course, again, we could spend a lot of time talking just about this issue, and there are definitely many possible factors responsible for this. But one of the more obvious one is the fact that the Arctic lemmings, small rodents forming the baseline of the Arctic food web together with the voles, has experienced at many sites just around year 1000 or a little bit before the crash in abundance or the cyclicity, which was known before, due to the climate change and rain on snow event during the winter, during the warmer winters. Those little creatures, animals, are actually under the snow cover, but if there is raining on the snow changes to ice, and those animals are unable to get enough food under the snow. So they can die in huge numbers, and sometimes they are unable to recover quite quickly. And this was the fact what happens at many sites. But actually the Arctic predators, as a fox, raven, skua, they are still around and they need to eat something. That's not the same fox, instead of going out of the den, grabbing the closest lemming and returning back, search through the tundra more longer and more likely encounter a nest of shorebirds or other birds as a suitable alternative prey. So it was known that in the case of a good amount of lemmings, shorebirds can breed successfully because they have nearly no predation, but without lemmings, the predation pressure is increasing on them. And unfortunately, quite recently, there is more often the situation where the nest predation rate is higher for this alternative prey. So we knew this from shorebirds, and from one of the possible advantages or these possible disadvantages why traveling to the north. But then I was thinking, all right, but this is just one of the possible good ideas or benefits why to travel to the north. What are the others? And we have searched the literature, put together the evidence, and it was quickly obvious that not only nest predation or like lower breeding productivity is playing a role, but that other factors are affected too. That's that the food supply as well as parasites. And yeah, we have been lucky to publish this important piece of work in Trends in Ecology and Evolution, and we are even more pleased that our Eurazine dotterel has been chosen for the cover of the current January issue of the journal. And right now we will cover a little bit more examples of migratory profitability disruptions. We can start with the food, which is example here for shorebirds and invertebrates, some insect prey for them. And again, it's known that on average, due to the quicker climate change and the quicker summers, quicker springs in the Arctic, the arthropods emerge earlier than migratory shorebirds can cope with this fact, and then the chicks of shorebirds hatch later, and they have less amount of food to grow well and to survive until the fledging. Of course, it's not every year in this case, and sometimes the mismatch might be even the opposite direction, but on average, we know that the insect is there right now earlier, and that the chicks can like suffer in terms of lower growth rate and lower survival. Here is the example for parasites. Actually, one parasitic worm using mostly common eider as a host has recently expanded the network due to the warmer climate, is now able to parasite on Arctic tern, black guillemot, and other species of gulls. So far only in low prevalence, but of course creating additional pressure for the animals there. And the similar thing is here with the lungworm of caribou across the Canada, where is shown the number of days which are suitable for the development of the given parasite. And actually, quite recently, for the first time, the time was enough for doing the complete cycle on the Victoria Island, which was for sure not the case several years or decades ago. That those parasites are entering the Arctic and invade the native species, and again making it more complicated for them, either in terms of direct mortality of adults or worsening their reproductive rate. And here we have the example of nest predation rates using our study with shorebirds, really showing that the small increase of nest predation has happened nearly everywhere across the world, but the increase was most pronounced and really rapid in the Arctic, and especially around the year 2000. And we have already discussed why this might be the case. Here we have used quite recently developed pulse press framework, how to frame actually the things what we are experiencing right now. That's that you can imagine the lots of possible stressors, and we divide them into acute stressors, which are pulses, and chronic stressors, which are presses. We mapped across the time scale here the 25 case studies described in the article. As you can see, more of them could be described more as the chronic stressors. Of course, sometimes it can be both, but the situation is that in acute stressors, the advantage can disappear quite quickly, but it's a temporal situation. It's not it go back to normal. So, for example, here we have the disease for saiga antelopes, which was in 2015 responsible for, I think, 80 population loss of saiga antelopes in central Kazakhstan. Given the global warming, some like intestinal disease really killed quickly a lot of saigas. But yeah, after next few years, it was all fine, and the population could slowly recover. It was the stressor pulse. Similarly, we know about avian cholera emerging among Arctic birds, mostly mostly eiders, again killing quite a big proportion of population, but acting, let's say, in 1 year and then returning back to normal. Whereas here, as possibly chronic stressors, presses, we could imagine like more long-term presses, the rising temperatures, the loss of the ice in the Arctic, or the chronically stressing higher respiration rates over the years could work as well as chronic stressors. That, of course, it's a continuum from acute to possibly chronic stressors, and some acute stressors, if combined or if present for a longer period of time, can quite quickly change to chronic stressors, which are making more important devastating consequences for population dynamics of the given species. At the same time, it's good to think about the spatial scale for which those disadvantages can appear. That's not some of the really, let's say, the highest negative impact studies are restricted to single island, as is the case of Arctic skuas having less and less food available at the small archipelago nearby UK. And of course, this is really bad, but it's affecting just tiny area, tiny population, whereas we have a lot of other studies showing the negative consequences on the really wide area, which is more like, of course, both cases are really important and worrying, but in case of large landscapes, the huge impact can be anticipated in the end. And at the same time, it's important to think about the stressors, because they act at a different temporal and spatial scale as well. For example, you can imagine that habitat loss or destruction or climate change can act at small local scale as well as a huge landscape scale. But yeah, for example, you know that volcanism could work really quickly and be really detrimental on a huge scale, but usually in terms of several years. Whether some other aspects like phenological mismatch can really work at nearly any scale, and agriculture intensification is usually working across the longer period of years and affecting the landscape on the long term. Well, we know what's happening in the Arctic or in temperate regions in the north, that the advantages might be changing, but we need to ask what the animals can do about it, whether they can adapt to the new conditions, for example, via successful behavior, life history, or physiological adaptation, or more realistically in the given short evolutionary time via phenotypic plasticity, and cope with the changing situation. For sure, many species are trying to do so, some of them with more or less luck, but on average, we have to say that the changes are happening so quickly that all the species are unable to adapt really well to quickly changing conditions. This is the example of brant geese, who can, for example, accelerate the spring migration and feeling the spring coming in when staging in the Netherlands. It can accelerate and fly more quickly to the Taimyr Peninsula to breed there. But because if skipped the refueling period in Netherlands, it has less amount of energy for producing the eggs, and it needs to rebuild the energy reserves there on the spot. And again, it's delaying the egg laying and chick hatching, and then the chicks might be mismatched with the plant phenology there. It can work to some extent, but there are constraints, some more, some less obvious for animals, how much they can cope with the changes and how much they can, for example, shift their migratory schedules. We know, for example, from a large scale point of view, that some shorebirds can avoid inbreeding in locations with high predation pressure, for example, which could lead long-term situation. For example, Svalbard, which naturally lacks the voles or lemmings, is less inhabited by some shorebirds who are breeding around in Franz Josef Land or some other archipelagos somewhere. They are breeding, but not in Svalbard, because of the fact of higher predation rate, and they time to time visit the island. It's not out of the flyways, but they simply avoid breeding there because it's not so good for them. And they can like cope with the situation on a large scale, but of course, if too many areas became unsuitable for them, then avoiding those areas inevitably shrink the whole population of the species. So again, just an example how the birds, or the birds, but in general animals, can try to adapt to the changing conditions. And on average, we must say that they are trying. Definitely they do, but the changes are so quick that they are unable to adapt really well and enough in full spectrum to the changing climate and changing conditions. Well, from conservation perspective, it's really important to understand which populations or which sites still present good advantages or good sites for migratory birds or animals to travel to reproduce, which are the same good or even better than they were before. Which sites or populations are actually altered, that they might be less suitable in some of the advantages than they used to be before, but still advantageous, still, let's say, source populations for the breeding animals, and which sites actually represent the possible ecological traps or degraded environments, where unfortunately the consequences are detrimental for the birds, and those are sink populations losing the benefit for the migration. Just quickly reminding you what ecological traps are. It's actually the choose of a high quality looking habitat, which is not good quality anymore. Isn't it just a random example from our agricultural landscape? If a northern lapwing is choosing a nicely plowed field in the spring, looking perfectly fine without vegetation, with marshlands, then unfortunately during the cultivation, all the clutches can be quickly lost because of drilling of the habitat, which the birds were unable to adapt to a priori. That we are losing right now lots of breeding productivity of northern lapwings for farm machinery, for example. That's that choosing wrong habitat in case that there is good, better alternative nearby. It's not less disturbed pasture, which maybe it's not so great, but still having better reproductive output. This is the ecological trap. And in case that there are like huge areas with degraded environment, and it's like obvious from the beginning, but the birds are unable to find suitable alternative nearby, then we are talking about degraded environment. And again, returning to the global picture, it's obvious that migratory animals are really restricted on many places. We have discussed already the wintering and staging areas, as well as recently emerging or recently being recognized issues on the seemingly pristine tundra or Arctic regions. It's obvious that those animals really face dual threat. They are under the double pressure, as well as for survival during the wintering or staging areas, as well as for Arctic and breeding season, where they can have higher trophic mismatch with the food. They can face increased predation or being infested in more parasites. And for future, definitely it's important to find out which stage is the limiting for each species, and what are the most limiting factors, whether it's more important the hunting in the winter or increased predation in the summer. Really finding out from the whole life cycle perspective of the birds or animals in general, what is the limiting and how we can help them, because of course that's something what we are trying to do to help our animals, and every little helps. We can start from direct nest protection to some local or regional management of habitats for breeding animals, breeding birds. But of course, because the migratory animals do not know borders, it's important to have well-established and well-working international network of protected areas. Again, the North temperate region differs from the Arctic. We could go through some examples. The Arctic is like fragile and opening. That would be nice to prevent big oil drilling and mining activities there. The waste disposal is an issue in the Arctic as well. You could imagine that behind the village there are usually big heaps of waste supporting some generalistic predators who then pose the higher threat to the breeding animals around. And of course, we really need to choose carefully the new trading routes leading across the Arctic, which is quite still unprotected from some perspectives. Well, in our agricultural landscape around us here in Central Europe, the agriculture intensification is a big issue, which we could talk about for hours for sure, spreading urban habitats. And in general, for migratory species, would be really good to keep the connectivity of the landscape, which is quite easier for the birds who can fly, but for animals traveling on the ground, any big railway or road or any linear construction fences could really prevent them from being able to migrate effectively through the landscape. Even like wind turbines can be quite detrimental for some birds or migrating pets actually. But again, we could talk quite long about those conservation implications. It would be nice to find out how does this framework really precipitate in, and how does it affect other model systems, as it might be like nomadic species or short distant migrants, as it's shown here by the snowy owl. Of course, many animals are migrating across Africa following usually the precipitation schedules, but there might be some changes ongoing there too, and definitely we know that Sahel is getting drier and drier. So it would be nice to find out how those changes are relevant for other migratory systems, as well as to non-terrestrial taxa, to fish and cetaceans, for example. And it's good, at least I see it in this perspective, to not stop with the publication, because the awareness of the public is definitely the key for successful conservation from my perspective. I would argue that all of us should take time to really disseminate our findings to the wider public. Luckily, those all things happened while I was in Peru, but I was quite surprised how many media really picked up the important message which we have been telling. And yeah, I was surprised that even some like gaming portals were interested for at least a time in climate change and migrating animals. Of course, in some of the media coverage, you can just find your name or some nice pictures, but that's it. Then you just need to hope that they pick it up well. And for some of you, if you would like to have some radio chats, interviews about the topic, longer ones, yeah, there is one in English, one in Czech with radio, Český rozhlas or Prague Radio, and you are more than welcome to enjoy this. Some from Bath University, the press release people are able to count somehow how many people have been approached by this news, and it's a really huge number, isn't it? With the media coverage, we can do quite a lot and help the whole like humankind to be aware about some issues in the landscape. Well, and to answer the question from the beginning, whether the migration to northern breeding grounds is still advantageous. My answer is hopefully yes. I'm still fully like I believe that in many cases it's still working quite well, that it's beneficial for the animals, but unfortunately it's less beneficial than it used to be. There are obvious examples where the behavior is really maladaptive and the population is going down due to this changes, and definitely it's an important phenomenon which we need to track and study in more detail in coming decades. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and this might be the end of the story, but it's not. And I would like to use this opportunity to share with you a little bit more about our emerging team and the opportunities here in South Bohemia. That's not right now. My new team has 2 PhD students who are still in Peru working with interesting shorebirds there. We really keep well the established cooperation with more than 40 teams around the globe, which helps us a lot to really combine data which we directly collect in the field together with data collected according to standardized protocols across those big amount of locations. And at the same time, we like to work with already extracted published data to really step back, see the same issues from wider perspective, and being able to draw out more general implications about the whole system and its functioning. So that's something what we like to do together with the many cooperations within here in Czech Republic or our university, as well as abroad, doing not only cutting-edge science, but really precipitating in applied science, education and outreach activities, as well as direct conservation. And just a little teaser, some of you who might be interested, I will start a new lecture this spring. Actually, right now it's already open. That's that you can register for this course, which will happen over 1 weekend, probably at some point in March. We will choose it together with students who will apply for this. Is for mostly for master or PhD students, but good, bright bachelor students can pick it up nicely, and there are no prerequisites. And even if using birds as you like a model taxon here, it will be highly relevant for people working with insect or with other taxons. That you are more than welcome to join us during those lectures, where over one weekend we will go much in detail of something what we mentioned here, but we will cover much more interesting topics from life history and evolution of birds. Well, and yeah, we are still not on the web pages because we started quite recently, but soon you will find more info about us at the Department of Zoology, as well as Center of Polar Ecology web pages. But just for a few of you, there are really exciting topics possible for master and bachelor students as well. So don't hesitate to get in touch if you are highly motivated, and I'm sure that we can find some interesting ideas and discoveries together. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.